Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Hipfire podcast. This is the 18th episode, and today we're going to be covering the AM scene quite a bit. So, obviously, recently there was a scouting series and elite series announced for the amateur scene this upcoming year. Before we get into quite how it's going to work, I just wanted to say we're going to be looking at a lot of clips in this episode. So, if you are a clip person, this is your episode. We're going to be breaking down kind of the different play styles that some of these amateur players bring and who to look out for the scouting series. So to understand how the scouting series works, let me throw it over to Yas and you can explain it down for you guys.
So as we saw, the CDL seems to be placing extra emphasis on the amateur scene this year, which is really positive, especially given how much talent is there, especially with also the former pros that we're going to see in these amateur matches, which we'll touch on later. So essentially, the way that they have it structured is they say the top 64 players from North America and the top 64 players from Europe, based on challenger points from the Modern Warfare season, will be invited to this event and drafted into teams by CDL coaches. During each day of the four event, taking place December 15th to 18th, 48 players per region will be drafted into matches by CDL teams. So essentially, each CDL team is going to get to draft from a pool of these AMs and have them compete in from what I assume, like round robin matches. And it'll give teams a better sense of who's talented, who's not, who should I pick up as a sub, and who should I look out for. Obviously, most of these teams should and probably do have a scouting report on at least a lot of these AMs, but this is better to see how they will do on the new Call of Duty, because I feel like that's really important for these teams, especially teams like Paris that don't have a roster. But
Yeah.
yeah, essentially that's the way it's going to work. So it's going to be a really cool event, and I'm really excited for it. In addition, they've also announced that they're going to have elite competitions throughout the season, similar to a league format. So, from my understanding, is that the top teams from each region competing each qualifying tournaments, will compete in qualifier tournaments rather to secure their spot in the elite stage. Once qualified, teams will compete in the round robin matches to earn the best record in the stage. And at the end of the stage, the top teams will compete in a playoff bracket to secure their spot in the next stage. So it's essentially like an 8-team academy event in its sense, but it's not going to be all academy teams. Obviously, it's going to be random AM teams or whatever AM teams are the best at the time. So this is again like just to showcase who the top teams are, get a better sense of who's separating themselves from the pack. And I feel like that'll be important, especially for NA, where last year we saw many teams win. But that's essentially what we got across the board for this year from the CDL. I'm really excited. And as Seth mentioned, we have a lot of players that we can get to that I think we'll see pop off during these events.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add as well. There were some players who were a bit nervous about the concept of the scouting series because they thought it'd be kind of like glorified eights, basically, because it's going to be a bunch of pickup teams. But the note that the coaches get to pick their teams kind of makes me a little bit more optimistic because I imagine these coaches know who the like AR players are, right? They'll know who the faster subs and the slower subs. So I hope they get like a pretty good understanding of the kind of team they want to build, and they can draft some. I mean, it is pickup teams, but draft some pickup teams that can work well together. And in terms of the elite series, last year we actually had recently had Zinc on the podcast, and Zinc talked about a little bit how you know last year every weekend you had a big event. So whether it was a home series or a Challengers Cup, you would just trade off big events. And at these events, there were like probably 64 teams plus playing in each event, right? So it's a gauntlet every time you play. So I do like the idea of an elite series where there's less teams competing, and it's almost like a playoff tournament for these amateur players versus playing in those like big open bracket tournaments every weekend. This might give them a little bit more stability and just it's a little less pressure because as Ziggs talked about on the podcast again, he mentioned like you're grinding 24/7 even as an amateur player, and it's a lot of work. And the problem with the system before was that you don't feel that rewarded winning home series because you're not getting a chance to play the pros anymore, right? That system's done. So you're just winning these home series. You're not really gaining much aside from a small little prize pool. But this elite series thing seems to be a better way of breaking that down and giving people more of a reward for playing well consistently. So we'll see that come into effect next year. And so to start, we have a table like this. We're going to go through the top 16 players who we've deemed the next up. So these are guys who have not been in the league yet, or if they have been, it's been very, very brief, and guys that we think are going to jump up into the league very shortly. This list again it's not really a perfect ranking in like 1 through 20. It's just guys that I expect to eventually one day make it into the league. So first up, we got Sibilance. I don't think this is much of a surprise for anyone. Sib is probably the most talked about amateur player right now, and he maybe not always for the right reasons because he obviously got taken off Atlanta FaZe Academy for a bit for saying something on stream. So he's definitely has some maturing to do. But in terms of his play style and how good his aim is and everything like that, it's top notch, right? He's definitely one of the top guys to be looking out for. I know that Atlanta FaZe recently just signed him out as a sub, and I think you also get into that in a bit. But we're going to show a clip here for most of the players here. And so for Sib's clip, it's not something like super special, but it just gives you a look at the kind of player that he is. So I'll play that right now. Unfortunately, we don't get it from his perspective because the drivers missed it. But here you go.
This point, but it's all about executing. FaZe have done it. They also have first blood as well. The advantage is there for them, and that bomb will be elected to move towards A if they can. And now here comes the push. Do they have eyes though? Sib on the top. Sib comes in with 3, and Gravity cannot shut him down.
Yeah, so unfortunately we don't get it from his perspective there. But basically what happened is he ran down mid-map, went up the ladder, and then caught all 3 of them. That's actually just all 4 Singularity guys were there, but he caught 3 of them with a nasty 3-piece before, and then we could turn around and shoot at him. The reason why I picked this clip out in particular to talk about Sib is because he has like a lot of aggression on the map, and he plays a very, very fast pace, but it's still measured. It's not just like the whole cracked mentality that some people like kind of associate with amateur players. They say like, oh, they're cracked. They're just running around getting kills. They're not playing smart. But that clip kind of shows that he can be aggressive while playing smart. So he picks the perfect time to pinch there. I think he's a guy top, top scaff, watching over the guys pushing at the bomb site, and he pinches and catches them at the perfect time, gets a 3-piece, and basically closes the map out. So it's an example of a fast play that's also a smart play. But yes, what do you make of Sib being a bench player for FaZe?
It was a bit confusing. I think we both talked about it. For a guy like Sib, you mentioned, for many people, he's one of the top AMs that people expect to get picked up or rather get an opportunity this year in the league. And for him to go back to a phase where, I mean, let's be honest, he's not going to get a opportunity on that team to start unless something with Alex happened, like Alex last year where he had his thumb hurt. Unless that happens on Atlanta FaZe or somehow like they have like a messy breakup or something, that's not going to happen. He's not going to get an opportunity to play on FaZe. So why he's going back to be their sub, unless his plan is, unless other teams just didn't inquire on him, I guess maybe this is just safety and he spends the year in the AM scene. But it is a bit confusing that he would sign there.
Yeah, the thing is like he's securing the bag, right? He's getting a job, which right now is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So I gotta respect that play, right? And also, I don't know if orgs are nervous about picking him up because of the lack of maturity. We saw the clip. I don't know if that plays a role into it or not, but whatever the case is, I agree that it's like a bit unfortunate because you probably won't get to see him play all year, and we might have another Venom situation where you have a really talented player bench ride the whole year. But either way, I hope he can play in the scouting series and does well in that. I hope we get to see him play some more because his play style is very fun to watch. That'll do it for Sib. So next up, we got Fire. Fire's a guy that we actually interviewed a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and he's surprisingly very, very humble in an in-person interview versus when he's online on Twitter. Um, but he's a very humble guy, wants to play the game correctly. And I watched back like tons of footage for this podcast, and the one thing I noticed about Fire compared to any other amateur player was the amount of grenade kills he was getting. It's a weird thing to be like particular about, but I've noticed that he just gets like consistent 1 or 2 kills with a grenade every time he throws it. And he talked about on the podcast he came up through the 1v1 hardpoint scene, which is kind of crazy because a lot of times these young guys come up through the S&D scene, and everyone knows it's through S&D. For Fire, it was a hardpoint, and he would play one-on-one at hardpoints. And I imagine maybe that's where he got the nade knowledge from. He's just used to putting them exactly where they need to be. Maybe it's also a little bit of Parasite's guidance. Whatever it was, he is very good with utility. just kind of a random note there. But it kind of plays along the whole kind of thing with Fire, where he has like really good game knowledge and he makes really smart plays, even though he's like a supposed fast, young, cracked sub. I don't really attribute that to his play style. And so the clip I'm going to show for Fire, I showed it in the podcast with Fire as well, because I think it just perfectly kind of captures his play style. So we'll play that now. Oh, hang on. There we go.
Usually they still might need that second flag. I'm not good at math, so don't quote me on that, but they do seem to be migrating nowhere. They're migrating nowhere. They're just protecting the C flag, so I'm guessing mathematically they're fine should they just keep this C flag under their control.
Someone did the math for sure.
Yeah,
someone's yelling. Someone's yelling. We're fine. We're fine.
Clearly,
we're fine.
But imagine yelling "we're fine" and then like the last second you're not fine, and then it's like,
oh no.
Oh, we're neutralizing
Look,
A.
Fire pushed out. 3 kills in favor of Get Busy. Things are turning around. UYU just might lose the lead that they were starting to build for themselves, but just like that, momentum shifts. 2 kills are opened up by Charles.
Yeah, so that clip there, Fire basically pushes through mid, gets 4 kills, and clears all the mid pressure out. So he takes away pressure from C. And then instead of kind of waiting mid-map and cutting people off, he decides to push into A. And he didn't get a kill pushing into A. He kind of just waited there. But just his presence there, knowing that someone was at their flag, they have to fall back from the push on B, which then means that his teammates can push up on B and take B and secure the map. So it's not like it's a great moment of like superior skill. It was just really smart to clear out mid-map, push up, start taking control of C, of A, and pull the opposition off of the B flag and let his teammates go in and clean it up. So what did you make of Fire during the interview, guys?
Yeah, so similarly, I also found him to be very humble. I think one of the interesting things that I feel like organizations will especially take a look at is his willingness to be coached and willingness to develop himself into the player that he wants to be. Not many players, and we've seen this in the past, not many players like to play with Hagi and take his criticism, but Fire has openly chosen to do so. He wants to learn from that guy. He wants to learn from Exotic and Goonjar as well, veterans in the scene, to improve his style of play. And to have a guy with that level of maturity in the AM scene is not very common. So when organizations look to pick up, obviously they look at talent, but also maturity level, I feel like is one thing that isn't talked about enough, and it's something that even I'm learning about, how important it is for players to have that. So I think that makes him one of the most attractive amateurs in the scene, is that maturity level that he has.
Yeah, I agree. I think wanting to be coached and want to play better players is not something that's so common with these young guys, right? So definitely a good trait for Fire. So moving on to Standy. Standy, the clip I have for Standy is him kind of just world starring, getting a 3-piece. So it's nothing that smart. But the one thing about Standy that I found interesting was I have a term called peace potential. And what peace potential means is just your ability to pick up 2 kills every time you're running around. Again, in 4v4, this might be harder to do, right? It might be easier to get pieces in 5v5 with a lot more people on the map. But regardless, the ability to pick up multi-kills is impressive, and Standy would consistently do it all the time. He kind of played a role in Triumph where it was Standy go kill, and he went and just got kills. That's kind of his role. And it worked out. He's a young player. He's a great shot. And he's definitely one of the next guys up. And I actually hopped to his stream recently. He's been streaming a lot of Chals on Black Ops 3. And his stream is interesting because he breaks down S&D pretty well. So he also has a good sense in that. I actually didn't know that about Standy. I didn't know he was S&D guru or mastermind or whatever. But watching a couple of his Chals, he definitely has a good sense for how S&D is played. So he's not a slouch in that game mode either. But I definitely seen him. I've been more impressed with him in Respawns for sure. And here's a clip of some of that.
15 seconds before we rotate, Triumph still with the favorable spawns.
And speaking of spawns, Steve is old. They're going to need a really solid hold when it comes down to Munition Depot. And Standy, I'll tell you,
oh,
starting
no.
to make some good plays up close. That's going to be 3 in a row.
Yeah, he just smokes that guy, spins on him, a little 180. So nice play from Standy. Obviously, Triumph ended up doing really well in the AM scene. It was a bit inconsistent to begin with, but they picked up steam towards the end. And a big part of that was Standy's kind of consistent slaying and respawn, when some of the other teammates weren't keeping up. So Standy's definitely got to look out for. But moving on to Zinx. So Zinx is another player that we interviewed. If you want to check out his clips, they're a bit longer. We got one of them in the podcast that we did with him, so you can go check that podcast out to see that clip because his playstyle is very, very slow. He's a very slow AR. So to get a clip for him, it's a lot slower, more methodical kind of clip. But I picked him as the top AR in terms of next up. And I did this because I feel like his playstyle will cater more towards 4v4 and it'll bring him more success in 4v4, especially with like a pickup team. I think he might do really well in that kind of system. He has talked about his issues before with toxicity in the podcast with him, and he says he's patched that up. I don't know. Obviously, he said that, but we'll see. But yeah, I picked him to be the first AR because he really made strides last year, and again, like his playstyle, I think caters towards 4v4. But what'd you make of Zinx in the interview, Yas?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of this similar takeaways. Obviously, he's talked about how he's focused on being a less toxic player, and that has improved his mindset, improved his opportunities within the scene, which is good for him. Another thing, I mean, I think like to note is that he's comfortable playing flex. Obviously,
That's true.
he's a very slow main AR player, so it's a bit hard to imagine. But to see that he is flexible in that role is important, especially for teams looking for. A lot of teams look for flexible players. I mean, just look at Minnesota; they're the epitome of that. So that's very important. But yeah, no, I think he calls himself the backline for a reason, for his ability to look over his teammates.
Yeah.
It's hard to see, especially ARs, and you'll see this as a common theme. It's hard to see these kinds of players break out because of like the limited spot and how many talented ARs there are already in the league. But he's definitely someone to look out for.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's probably. I mean, there's a lot of other good ones that are also former pros, right? Like Wuskins, for example. But he's up there in terms of ARs looking on the outside, looking in. But after Zinx, we got Venom, so our second Atlanta FaZe Academy player. Venom had a really rocky beginning of the year, in my opinion, because he could definitely slay, there's no doubt about it. But the whole Academy team, FaZe Academy team, did not play the game that well. They didn't rotate that well. They were like way too concerned about getting kills. And I was actually really impressed with how Venom developed as a player over the course of the year. I thought he got a lot more like reined in a little bit. He's a little bit too fast. So he definitely got brought back a little bit, slowed down, and he looked great towards the end of the year. We got a clip for Venom. Let's see that.
Since the game even started, and that's
This
the
is
reason
nasty.
why we see the score line the way that it is, the way they play over at Tire Shop off the rip is a major advantage for them, and Venom has caused some problems. That's 4 in a row. Can he make it 5?
No.
And he does! What an insane shot onto Maple. Did not even stand a chance.
Yeah, he just completely smokes Maple there. Sorry, Maple. Well, actually, sorry, I should mention before, we are going to cover the EU players in the next week's podcast, but yeah, anyway, so yeah, Venom just destroys Maple there. This is the beginning of the year when Singularity were like the best team, and Venom just kind of destroys them there, little 5 spree and Dom, so he looks pretty good there. And like Standy, I would say Venom has pretty good piece potential as well. But just like solid movement, solid Slayer, nothing like super spectacular. He's not like a S&D specialist who's gonna give you 10 kills at least in S&D map like some of the other guys on this list will, like Katani down there at the end. But he'll give you consistent results, consistent play style. It's fast, it's good movement, and yeah, I think this Atlanta FaZe team, with the right structure, did well towards the end, right? So I think for a guy like Venom, I think it really matters who his teammates are, which is why like I'm a little bit worried about him in the scouting series. If he doesn't get the right team around him, I don't know if he might play at a different pace from everyone else because he does play very fast. Well, we'll have to wait and see for that. For Cells, so Cells is the second AR on this list, and Cells is someone that I particularly have like hyped up a lot, and I know that he's not exactly the most well hyped up of the scene. But when Optic LA was picking up teammates from UIU to play like Draza and Hollow, I actually personally thought it should have been Cells. Obviously, Slasher is a very good main AR, and I think he, should be the main AR. But Cells can flex. I don't think that's a problem. And Cells is also really good in S&D, which is why I thought they should have gone for Cells. Obviously, Hollow looked fine. Jaws looked great, so nothing wrong there. But I thought Cells was the lock for sure. I don't know if he'll make the jump up this year because like the talent pool of ARs again. We talked about it. It's tough. But I got a Cells clip. It's towards the end of a hard point, and he ends up shooting some bodies at the end of the clip. So it's kind of nice.
Was happening in that last hard point, and it was really unfortunate because Get Busy, they couldn't afford to rotate early, because if they did, they could have lost off that hill if they lost the gun fights inside of it. Disgusting. But when they made that,
yeah, it's hard to see the scoreboard there, but he was top of the scoreboard in that map, and he plays a little bit faster than Zinx as an AR. He's not like formal AR fast, right? But he's a bit faster, plays a bit different kind of style of an AR, and I don't think it'll translate as well to 4v4, but I'm sure he'll be fine. Again, like the reason why he's higher than some of the other ARs is because of his S&D knowledge and prowess. Very good in search. That'll take us to Pure. So yes, what'd you make of Carnage game? I know you weren't super tuned in to the AMC, but Carnage did end up surprising a lot of people. What'd you make of that team?
They felt like a sleeper team in many ways. But again, this is, as you mentioned, I'm not in tune with the AM scene as you are. But if I'm not mistaken, they placed second. Was it at second champs? Yeah. So they came out and made some noise. Obviously, I think Nightmare is one of the more well-known teammates on that roster. They gave teams problems throughout the year, which in the NA especially, the NA seemed to sort of, you had multiple teams at their peaks. Obviously, Fire and 5-Star Gaming, they won the last Toronto home event. You had events with Glow Frosty, Willet, and Awakening winning events. So in an NA scene where you had multiple teams at the top, it always seemed like Carnage was always there to like upset a team or make some noise. And I think it's really, I think with this next upcoming season, it'll spread a lot more light if they can be that sort of same team and consistent team that can upset people and have that upset potential.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, because I had the same kind of thinking about Carnage as a lot of the community does, where I didn't hold these players in a high regard. And I don't really attribute it to the online thing as some other people did. I think they just knew the game really well. Like whenever I watched them play, they always run like good on rotations and played really well as a team. I think they're one of the few teams that stuck as a core four for like the entire year. And next year, as that core four, they're going to keep it together. But yeah, they kept pulling up upsets and beating teams that I thought were better. And so I didn't have Pure or Nightmare on the list to begin with. But after watching their footage and watching the gameplay, I think those two on that team stood out a lot and actually really surprised me. So first clip will be for Pure.
Gunfights aren't coming near the hill, they're just coming around it, and it's not building any time.
Yeah, 13 seconds on the hill in total is not really what I think you wanted for. And even in that last 20 seconds when you were calling out Royalty's position, you saw that Triumph was conceding that hill in favor of sending most of their troops over to the screen office. Will be a 1v1 inside the hill. Pure able to get the beat down as Standy only had the pistol in hand. So Carnage win this rotation. You see all the X-ray. That's coming through the back parking lot. So with that spawn knowledge coming up, Pure turns his attention to the front door.
Yeah, I hate how that camera angle caught it badly there. Going down the stairs, that cuts to like a corner camera in the room for some reason. But either way, sick clip. He went on a 10 spree there, and I think he already had 5 before the clip started. But he went on a 10 spree and against a really good team. Like that's not against a scrub team, So he's able to do that against the top AM teams in the game. And that clip to me was like, I was like, all right, it's clearly not just game knowledge. Like these guys can shoot back as well. So pretty cool to see. I didn't think Pure and Carnage were that good. But after watching the footage back, they can slay. So the last person on the first 8 on the list is Katani. So Katani is like one of those guys that I feel like people might be a little bit surprised he's on the list because he got top 32 at the Champs Challengers. But he got top 32 because his team was 6th gear and they kind of imploded after one of their teammates got poached and then they couldn't find a good 5th, so they kind of just split up and went their different ways. And Katani ended up on a pretty poor team at the end of the year. And it was a bit disappointing for me because I thought he was great, especially in S&D. So the point with Katani is he can definitely slay and respawn. He's not a slouch, but his big kind of selling point for why he should be a sub somewhere is S&D. Like he's very, very, very calm and like collected in S&D. Like he makes smart plays, and even when it seems like he's panicked, he kind of knows what he's doing still. And this clip kind of shows it because there's like two separate incidents of him almost fumbling and making a misplay, but then ending up with like a 1v3. So we'll show that clip now.
As he was trying to pitch things up, it's looking like this should lead to a relatively safe bomb plan here at A.
Oh, look at that line sight from Katani. Doesn't want to really reveal his position, but at the very least gets the good timing in terms of not allowing for that objective to be planted. Boy. And in the meantime, TCM takes down Journey. TCM is just so annoying to have to deal with if you are this Atlanta roster, just constantly having a player that can hide around and be a nuisance is never going to be fun. Katani, last one alive as a player up close. Not a whole lot of ammo. Picks up the MP5, tosses out the smoke to hopefully try to get out and dodge, and shuts down the end.
Yeah, nice little 1v3 4K there from Katani. I love how like he tries to wallbang that like weird pole, can't do it, gets the kill. Then he falls down, like fumbles at the door a little bit, opens it up, gets the kill. And then like he opens the door to try to pick up an SMG, fumbles that around. And on the last kill, he throws like a really pointless smoke grenade for no reason at all, and still gets the kill at the end. So like I've noticed that a lot with Katani, where he does make these clutch plays, and he's very good in S&D. Just a little bit chaotic, but he's definitely a player that can make a huge impact for any kind of team looking to be better in search. And we saw last year Pander make an impact. I guess not that great actually, but try to make an impact as a S&D substitute for, I think it was for Enable on Seattle. But yes, what do you make of that whole kind of idea of using a sub for search?
I always found it to be interesting. I figured if you were going to see it any year, this season would have been the year. But with that being said, I don't think any of the teams or coaches, I don't want to say the word creative, but in a way, I guess are creative enough or out there enough to be willing to sub in someone specifically for S&D. I mean, we had teams asking for it for like Seattle's definitely a team that should have tried that at least because they were going nowhere fast in S&D. But yeah, for the most part, I don't think we'll see it. I do think at best, if he doesn't make the league, if that is the case, S&D coach would definitely be a spot. I mean, we've seen that happen with other S&D stars do that, become an S&D coach and try and help other teams. But you see the talent that he has. I'd like to see him go for it. I think that if he develops his respawn to be more consistent, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, and to touch on that a little bit more in terms of sub spots in CS:GO, a little bit of a jump to different esport quickly. In CS:GO, there was recently a player who got picked up to be a 6-man on a roster, and the way it works basically is he gets substituted in as map dependent. So on a certain map, he's better at holding down a certain angle or a certain bomb site than his teammate. So they'll sub him in, he'll play that map, and he'll come back out. And so far, it's been working pretty well for them. And what it got me thinking is what you can do with a guy like Katani, or with a guy like, I don't know, Teddy Rex, or some S&D superstar, where you could tell them is hey, we want to be better. Let's say it's already halfway through the year, right? And they have certain S&D maps they're really struggling on. They just can't figure it out. Right. One thing you could do is you could say to your academy team or to your sub player, hey, get really good at this map. Get like understand this S&D map, watch tons of footage, and get like mastered, right? And so either that person, like let's say it's Teddy Rex, right? Maybe you don't want him on the map because he's not, super reliable in 1v1s. No offense, Teddy, I love you, but you're not. But he does have a really good sense for S&D, so you can kind of coach them and team be better at S&D. Or what you could do with the Katani is, let's say you're Seattle. Right, let's throw him back in the mix. Let's say Looney's having a tough time on a certain map, or as Persini, right? We've seen Persini struggle on certain maps, particularly in S&D, where he tries to get aggressive and gets picked off. So you could say, all right, for this map, we're going to sub Katani in, and Katani's going to make plays for us in S&D. Especially in 4v4, I think one person in S&D makes a bigger difference than in 5v5. So if you have an S&D star in 4v4, able to make plays, able to get you 2 pieces and open up bomb sites for you, I think it's super valuable. And I do want to see sub players next year. I don't know if we will, but I want to see it. I like the idea. So that'll wrap it up for the first top 8. And yeah, again, this list isn't like a definitive 1 through 8. I think the 1v1's better than number 8. It's just kind of the guys that I expect to be in the league. The next table we have is the next 8, and we have some. First one is, I guess he's like kind of a pro because he played for EG for like an event in Black Ops 4 and looked great, but then he got subbed out for accuracy, or he got dropped for accuracy. And then last year he bench rode the entire year on Paris, which is upsetting, but it happens. He secured the bag, but he's very good main AR, and his slow play style. He'll do fine in 4v4. It's not gonna be a problem for his kind of play style. What do you make of Phantoms, Yas?
Venom is a very interesting player for me. It was unfortunate, and I feel that hurt him. The fact that he wasn't able to play either for Paris or in the Challenger scene last year. So I wondered to see how that has affected his development. Obviously, it's 1 year. I expect him to still be a strong AR, but just to give some context to how good he was, even when he was dropped off EG, looking at the champs overall leaderboard, he had a 1.22 KD, a 1.18 to 1.12 average AKD. Based on COD stats, he's one of the top players in the tournament. Obviously, UIU only made it so far. He only played 13 maps, so take it with a grain of salt. But for the maps that he played, he was he was their best player without a doubt, and he showed up.
Yep.
And he was a very strong S&D player from what I remember as well. The only reason he was dropped off EG, it wasn't based off his performance. It was based off the fact that Lamar had a relationship with, guys like Attach, and as a result, he became their main AR, and Phantoms was left to the wayside. So I feel like this is a great opportunity for himself to bounce back, prove himself once again to those that think he no longer has it. It was unfortunate he had to play behind a guy like Dens, who I think was a very solid AR, but I'm very curious to see how this year goes for him.
Yeah, and he's gonna be. He tweeted out that he's gonna team with Sib, Dylan Rex, and Jimbo for next year, and looking for org. That's a solid team. That's a very, very solid team. Yep. They should do pretty well. Sorry, Dylan Rex, you're not on the list. I got 16 people. It's hard to fit you in. But Dylan Rex played for UIU last year, did fine in that role as a flex player. I think he'll balance himself out well with Phantoms. They could both run an AR on 2 AR maps. And then Jimbo, who's actually next, we can talk about, will fill in the 4th spot. So Jimbo and Venom were like the 2 subs for Atlanta FaZe last year Academy. And they both played very fast. And Jimbo actually came from he used to team with Archives, I guess you pronounce it, or Archives. He's like this also young Canadian player. And they both got banned, I believe, for a whole year. I think it was World War II. Was it Black Ops 4? I don't remember. They got banned for a whole year for ringing, basically. So it's unfortunate. Setback in their careers. But this year, Jimbo looked fine. Joined Atlanta FaZe Academy. Again, just like Venom, same story. Beginning of the year, wasn't well coached, wasn't well practiced, had a lot of issues in his gameplay. Could definitely slay. That was never a question, right? It was more just about kind of understanding the game better, realizing that on Azir Cave, do not give up spawns for P2. Do not pinch P1 and give up spawns for P2. I mentioned that specifically because I saw Jimbo do that a bunch of times. He actually did it like twice in the same map, and I was like, Jimbo, what are you doing? All right, but towards the end of the year, they got it locked down. Jimbo played a lot better, and I'm excited to see what that team does with Phantoms, Jimbo, Sibilance, and Dylan Rex. It sounds great to me. It sounds like everyone has their roles pretty well defined, which I think is something to be noted for next year. Because we talked about this in our tier list video in our last video, and people didn't seem too happy about it. But we talked about the idea of having like defined roles and set roles. It is an important thing, like Call of Duty. Like it just is. You have to have your main AR, have to have your flex, and your 2 subs. One sub's going to be more aggressive than the other sub. Like you're going to have natural roles. And to me, on like an ear test, the Phantom team sounds like it's pretty good to me. But I'll take us to our next AR player. It's Diamond Con. So Diamond Con played for 6th Gear for the most part of the season last year, and then joined Triumph at the very end, and ended up winning the Challenger Champs at the end on Triumph. And for Diamond Con, it's tough because I feel like he has this like belief in the community amongst some players that he's a baiter. And that's just like a sucky situation for an AR player, right? Because you're always going to be seen as like somewhat of a baiter because that's what you do. Like you're the backline. Your teammates weaken them up and then you kill them. Like Octane and Black Ops 4 was like, nope, it was World War II. was one of the best main ARs. And in World War II on LG, they had like, I think, was it World War II? Was it the year before? Might have been the year before, but they had like their team led all 3 players who were the JCap, Slacked, and John. They led the scene in assists. Like out of the top 5, they had 3 LG players all in the top 5 for assists because they were just feeding octane kills. That's like the best. That's the better way to play. Like you want to weaken them up for your AR players to kill them. It makes sense. So if AR players are baity, I don't know what to tell you, right? That's kind of what they're supposed to do. And Diamond Khan's kind of case, that is kind of what he does. And the reason why I have him above Dav Patty, and Dav Patty was actually dropped for Diamond Khan at the end of the year. So Dav Patty was on Triumph, gets dropped for Diamond Khan. Diamond Khan ends up winning with Triumph. Dav Patty comes like 5th, 6th, I think. And the reason why I had Diamond Khan above him isn't just because of the win, but it's because of the playstyle. I think Diamond Khan has a better sense of the game, at least in my opinion. And it seems like he understood that his slow player style doesn't mean he's less of a player. He's not bad, right? He's just a little bit slower. And Dav Patty is like freakishly fast. Like it's weird for an AR player to play so fast. I don't understand I don't even know what sensitivity he's on. He might be on a huge sensitivity. And you'll see what I mean by this clip that I'm going to show right now, because it's very odd.
Port of Dav Patty on the flag, and if they try to capture B here, Carnage falls out of favor towards the A flag.
I mean, UYU is so fast to get these decaps and the challenges on the flags. Like, it's almost unreal how quickly they find these gunfights and they get in and out. One of the things we talked about with Atlanta FaZe Academy was how they don't waste time during the fights. They get in, they get the kills, they get the objective done, they get out. Look at what UYU has been able to do. They're absolutely shredding everyone on the C flag. They've moved through mid-map. They have it locked down. Dave Patty's just doing 460s and 720s on the map because why not? They have the lead, and if you're Carnage, you...
I love the caster. He's doing 460s and 360s because why not? But that is like what Dav Patty kind of does. He's a much faster AR player. I know some people also said he baits. He's an AR player, right? He's going to get called a baiter. But his playstyle is much different from Diamond Khan. And it may have been what Triumph needed. It was a bit more of a measured AR player to slow things down. And UYU, towards the end of the year, did kind of lose their consistency a bit. So maybe that's why. But Diamond Khan and Dav Patty are pretty close in my eyes in terms of which one's better. So yeah, look out for those guys. I think as for the Challengers scouting series, for what it sounds like, we'll have 64 players, 64 teams. So how many teams is that then? Excuse my math. Is that 16 teams? Yeah. So you have 16 teams. So you have 16 main ARs. That's kind of the concept I'm going with right here. So if you have 16 main ARs in the scouting series, Dav Patty and Diamond Khan are both 2 great options for one of those ARs. And I imagine they'll be competing in one of the better teams in those scouting series matchups. Which then brings us to Gravity. So Gravity is another AR player. He kind of plays like a major maniac role because of how fast Atlanta FaZe plays last year, Academy. It was very similar to how their actual starting team played as well, because they were just super fast play style. You have Sib, Jimbo, and Venom right in your face. You kind of needed someone to kind of rein things back and play more smart and methodical, and Gravity did that last year. And Gravity also played with Venoms back in the day, a lot of Atlanta FaZe Black. He played with Simp as well and Cell. So he's been on some really good teams. He's played with great teammates, and they always seem to do well. Gravity, just in my eyes, isn't quite spectacular as an AR. Again, that could be because of the team he's on. He might stand out more next year, and I hope he does because he is a very good player. And if you have replays vouching for you, not a bad thing. What do you make of Gravity, Yas?
Yeah, I think you
Yes.
summed it up pretty well. Sorry about that. You summed it up pretty well there. Obviously playing on Atlanta FaZe for the most part, I think give him a spotlight where others didn't get that same opportunity, and I think it was pretty solid all year. Obviously, it's hard to differentiate between the main ARs and the NA scene. As we mentioned, guys,
It is, yeah.
Thanks. Sal's was also a very strong one. And even one that we don't have on this list, Glowfrost, is also another talent to look out for, but didn't crack our list. So, again, it brings up that issue I have with pretty much every main AR that we have, whether it be in the NA or EU scene, is that how much opportunity are players like that going to get? Will that deter them from continuing down this path, or will they try and switch to a flexible position because teams seem to favor players that are flexible? But yeah, I think Gravity had a pretty solid year all around, and I hope that it can keep that consistency going into next year.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that if he needs to flex, he'll flex. Like that's fine, you can do
Yeah.
that. So because he played with Venoms, and Venoms ran red AR, and Gravity did flex in that game, right? So yeah, so he can do it. But that'll take us to well, actually, I have a clip of Gravity. This clip's actually more of just like Atlanta phase as a whole, and I wanted to share it because one, Gravity turns and burns on somebody, and it's hilarious, and then two, it also kind of just shows what I mean when I say Atlanta phase was like that good at slaying. So let me show that clip.
Ready to move on to the next match for this team. This guy wants to see Atlanta FaZe Academy in the grand finals.
And right now, it looks like Atlanta's just trying to play to get to the next game. Like, they look like they just want to go right to the next hard point. Look at how they're smoking all of Carnage. It's consistently 3-4 kills. The beams from Venom on a 2-spree. 10-4. That's a damn good stat line. I'm just going to put that out there. 4 kills in a row. Atlanta FaZe Academy looking very good. They have a 2-cap lead. Some questionable decisions on that A flag. They weren't able to win the fight, but I love the overexertiveness, trying to get the 3-cap. It's working all of the dividends right now. Gravity.
Sorry,
just
Pierre.
beaming, disgusting turn, and he's just making everyone look stupid.
Such a crucial part of the map, and you see why he's not leaving there. We got to stick on board with the Atlanta FaZe Academy on defense, or B flag defense. They've been holding it down there. Looks like the pressure has moved towards the A flag, though, as they seek neutralization. The defending Carnage players are able to keep that at bay. They're still spawning up in such a poor part of the map, though, and it's going to be tough to work through, as Guns is still able to find 2 kills in it all.
Once again, the speed from Atlanta FaZe is just a little bit too much for Carnage to handle. Journey went for a cheeky challenge. That was hilarious. Doesn't work out, but the damage is done. 1:10 left in this round. They have a 2-cap, and they've had it for the majority of this game, Fox. 11-1. He's 11-1 to start off this domination. I mean, finally does get taken down, but that's all you need to know about this team.
Yeah, as the caster said there, he's 11-1, and that's all you have to know about this team. Sums it up perfectly right there. You know, they're super slay heavy. They can slay at anybody. Gravity plays a bit slower, goes 11-1. His teammates are running around getting every kill possible. It looks like Atlanta FaZe, like the actual Atlanta FaZe team with Major Maniac having a really good dom map, but everyone else is killing everyone. So yeah, nice to see that from Gravity, and yeah, hopefully he can be on a good team next year. So that'll take us to Noisy. Noisy's again like Katani. He and Katani were like the duo for so long last year until that team split up. And I loved watching Noisy and Katani running on the map. They both had SMGs in their hands. They both played pretty fast and got a lot of kills. And Noisy was like also very good in S&D. I would say not quite as consistent as Katani, but also very good. So I'm going to show a little clip of Noisy and S&D as well.
Silence is going to have to clutch things up in a 1v3 from the 3rd floor. Very dangerous task, because he'll do a little bit of parkour. Comes on down, gets a tag on the bomb site. Wait a second, Noisy. He's going to find the second. Able to reset everything. 12 seconds, and Noisy's done it. Pentagram hasn't stuck the bomb. He's going to have to jump onto it right now. Noisy making a bunch of noise. He wins that one as well.
God.
Tyler Noisy making all of the commotion.
Yeah, so Noisy with a nice 1v3 there. Jumps up from top 3rd onto 2nd, lands, jumps onto the staircase, shoots the guy on bomb a little bit, turns, shoots the guy on the stairs, goes back and kills the guy on the bomb, and gets away so they can't kill him for the defuse. And then I see on the kick, he kills Pentagram on the stairs. Obviously a very impressive S&D clip. What's also more impressive is we talked to Zinx, that team that he just did that to, that team had won like 12 S&D maps in a row. So for Noisy to do that against an S&D team is like pretty impressive. He looked great doing it. So yeah, it's Noisy. He played for 5-star at the end of the year and played alongside like Fire and Parasite and those guys, and seemed to have a pretty good thing going on with them. So I don't know if he'll team with them next year or if he's still looking for a team, but definitely look out for Noisy to be a star player next year in the MC. That'll take us to Willet. Willet's the guy who like really came out on my radar this year. I didn't know much about him before, and all of a sudden he started making it up the reins of like AM teams. He ended up on UIU and then ended up at Atlanta Reapers at the end of the year. And it was like a steady kind of grind for him where he was like playing with lower tier players and then started slowly kind of rising up to the top of the AM scene. And I didn't really understand why, because he wasn't like that much of a slayer. He's quite solid in S&D, so I'll give him that. But he's not that consistent. But towards the end of the year, consistency came through, And I don't know this 100%, right? Because I don't obviously hear enough comms, but it seems like Willet is a good teammate just because of the fact that every team that he's been on and moved past and joined has gotten better. And when I've talked to guys that have teamed with him, no problems there. So it seems like Willet's a good player for the scouting series kind of matchup because he's so versatile and can play in so many different rosters and make them better. If you're going to do this kind of 8 style of a scouting series, you can put Will into a team, and I imagine it'll get better. So we'll see that next year from him. And then last up, Nightmare, again, like I mentioned with Pure, I feel like I had to include these Carnage guys in here just because, like, again, they surprised me. They consistently shocked me. Yas mentioned it as well. You know, they kept having the kind of surprise upset mentality, and it kept working. Like, they kept playing well. They also grinded a lot. They played in like every possible Florida Mutineers challenge on Wednesday nights. They got together and played for that. Gunsy on his stream, they seemed like they had pretty good communication the whole year as well, which I cannot say for the rest of the EMC teams in North America. But here's a nice little clip for Nightmare. It's a 43 kill game.
So you do have some benefits, but the only problem is they're not converting it for the moment. Nightmare in your hill, 35 and 22. Trophies are out. It's contested, but that benefits Carnage. They're not allowing UIU to rack up more time. The lead doesn't increase at
pre-fire
all.
here.
Carnage is feeling himself, 37 and 22, 38 on a force spree, shutting down everyone in the front of the line. And once again, Carnage riding the back of Nightmare's performance. They now grab the lead, and we're watching the top side of a minimap. Rotation's got to be big. Carnage have an opportunity to take this game away.
Nightmare is the VIP at this point. He's approaching 1 minute of hardpoint time. He's approaching 40 kills in the kill feed, and he's on his 3rd 5 streak in this game. This man, his M4, has been a force throughout this entire Azir cave.
Yeah, as Fox said, you know, his AR was a force that whole map, and they actually were down by a lot in that map, and they came back all behind the 43 kills from Nightmare against UIU, and it kind of shows like yeah, they knew how to play the game well, and it was very clear because they kept pulling off upsets. We also have to have a lot of sling to pull off upsets, so you do have to have some guys going off. And from what I saw in Carnage, it was consistently Nightmare and Pure going off, pulling off upsets. So I don't know how they'll do next year in 4v4. It's going to be, you know, Ryza, Gunsy, Pure, and Nightmare. But I'm looking forward to them doing well. And I think it's just ARs, right? Like Yas mentioned, we're going to keep mentioning until like the dawn of time. There's one AR spot per team in the CDL, just one. And that means there's only 16, or not even 16 yet. There's only 12.
Yeah.
Only 12 ARs in the league. So to get a spot, it's going to be tough, especially because there's so many good ARs already in the AM scene, especially in North America too. You don't see that all the time in Europe. You have like a good 4 or 5 in Europe. That's about it, right? In North America, you have a good like 8, and those 8 are not even returning pros. Those are just 8 good AM ARs. So at least. But Nightmare impressed me a lot more than I thought, and he played very well last year. So we should looking forward to these guys playing well next year in the scouting series. So it's interesting, right? This is my list in terms of like top 16 players, and I mean like Glow Frosty, Dylan Rex, Stamino, Pentagram. I love Pentagram, right? Great S&D player. D-Lo, also good S&D player. A lot of guys left out on the list, but this is kind of my take on who are the guys that I think could be the next up. So we'll see what happens next year. Also, you got guys like Nair Poison and Mental, and who are signed on to the Gladiators roster. We'll see if we can get some good gameplay from them as well. But that'll kind of wrap up the next up category. And then for the next category, we have the former pro. I put in brackets likely to play challengers because of guys like Temp and Slacked and Classic and, you know, Nato out of Saints. I don't know if they're going to be so inclined to play in challengers. Like, I don't know if they feel like it's really like, I don't know, demeaning is the right word, but they might just want to wait for next year for the expansion. Or if they do play in challengers, it might be later in the year on a sub spot. And I don't know if they'll play in the scouting series. I kind of doubt they will. But this is a list of players who either did play last year in the challenger scene or who also said and mentioned they're going to play it next year. So, yes, why don't you run us down this list?
Yeah, so this podcast has run pretty long, so I don't want to take too much of your time, as most of you know these players. But guys like Mux, especially someone I think that needs to 100% be looked out for, especially if there's a AR in the lead struggling. I expect him to be the first one that teams look at. You look at his pedigree, going back to Black Ops 4, he's one of the top ARs there. And the only reason he really faltered on that Florida team was that he had to compete with Skies. Skies was their mini art, and he stepped to the plate. Skies was, he was ranked, I think, top 10 by Breaking Point GG, top 10 player this year. He was one of the best mini Rs, probably second to only Octane. So Mox, once he gets to be that mini R full time once again, I think we'll see his true potential and the play that we got from Black Ops 4 and even IW when he was popping off on that game. So expect a lot of that from him. Royalty, obviously he ended up winning with Triumph this year. He always seems like a player that is always on the cusp of being in the Pro League, but never seems to be able to stay in. I mean, he's had stints multiple times, obviously AW being the first one. He was on the Black Ops 3 team that I think got picked up by the first initial 100 Thieves Black Ops 3 team, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a mess. Obviously, he had his time with E6 and IW, which was pretty cool. But can he stay in the Pro League, or will he even get another shot? I think will teams overlook him because he's not been able to stay in that Pro League. I'm not sure. Haggy, I mean, at this rate, unless there's expansion, I don't see Haggy playing in the Pro League this year. Maybe next year. Teams have passed him on him before. He is extremely talented still, and he has a lot to offer in the in-game leading role. So he's another guy that I think will continue to develop, because he's helped a lot of players grow. And Fire
for
being
sure.
the most recent one that we talked about. But Seth, why don't you take the next couple players?
Yeah, so Exotic, he was kind of my pick this earlier on the year as like the most ridiculous player left out of the pro scene, because he like was EG's best player for the first half of the year last year until Attach came in and ended up taking that reign. But he was very good in Black Ops 4. Like he, even though he wasn't in the pro scene this year, like he was very, very consistent and very good, and somehow left out and wasn't even in the sub spot. So it's kind of crazy that he didn't get even a chance as a sub this year. I don't know. His personality doesn't seem like a problem. So I don't know what it is. But he played great this year in Challengers. He just I don't think he ever figured out 5v5 S&D though, to be honest, because he had some very sketchy plays in Piccadilly S&D. But anyways, Exotic, he's again like royalty. He's kind of made the grind, made the rise into the pro scene, but never really seemed to break out like past. Because even though he was the best player for a bit on EG, they didn't win. Like they weren't consistently winning. So it wasn't like you could really say he was consistently great if the team wasn't winning. But again, like an expansion, I could see him being on a team for sure, hands down. But like this year, right? An expansion next year makes it a little bit harder because you have guys like Slacked and Classic and Saints who have been, and Temp, have been like longer standing, better like ceiling players than Exotic. So I'm a little bit, concerned about his chances of getting back into the league. But John's he's a good player, so he will either stay dominating the AM scene and playing pretty consistently in that, or he'll get his chance. And then for Frosty, obviously Frosty played great for Florida last year, especially when they were in their dominance of the month of March, or whatever month it was. I think it might have been May, when they won like 2 events and looked pretty unstoppable. And Frosty played a tough role. He was on rotation with a sub, or he was on like second guy in after Havoc. So he played a pretty tough role as like a bit of more of a slower sub player. He also flexed a little bit with an AR before Pharaoh went away. He started picking that up. So he showed his versatility and showed his skill off, but still didn't get a spot. So he's decided to play both Halo whenever that comes out, and in the Challenger scene next year. I don't think I wouldn't recommend that for like anybody except for maybe Frosty because of how good his like natural gun skill is. And I think he might be teaming with Blast and another Halo player next year. I think he just tweeted that out, so that should be interesting. And so that was Blast and Neptune, not Frosty. My bad. But Blast and Neptune, we'll get to Blast later. But yeah, Frosty, we'll look forward to what he does next year. And if Halo does come back, he might lean towards that if he doesn't get a spot. But we'll see what happens with Brandon. But Next we got Gunjar. Why don't you talk about Gunjar? I know you've known him for longer.
Yeah, Gunjar. It's interesting to see him still in the still competing to this day. Not because he isn't talented, but he seemed to at least perception has changed. Obviously, way back when Ghost, when I first started watching, he was a top main AR, and a lot of people today didn't get to see him at his peak. He was incredibly talented, very solid AR that you could always count on, always depend on. Obviously, known for being on Team Caliber back when they were very, very good. But now he's sort of changed into I feel like a different position where he, alongside guys like Hagi, um, they're consistent, and he played well. He was consistent alongside that 5-star gaming team. I mean, they won the Toronto home event. They placed top 6 at Challenger Champs, if I'm not mistaken. So he still got it. He's still competing at the top of the amateur scene. I think his role has now also added on top of the fact that he plays in AR. He's also developed, this veteran presence where he can help educate and help these kids mature. As Fire mentioned, how Exotic and Gunjar have mentioned to hit Fire, that is that gotta watch what you say on Twitter, gotta be more professional, and so I feel like that adds to his skill set. Will a team take a chance on him? I want to say yes, but I don't think so. Maybe in a coaching position if that's something he's interested in. But we just like to list him because, he's been in the scene forever, and I feel it'd be disrespectful not to include him.
Yeah, it takes us to Blast, and Blast is someone who is obviously very, 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 very skilled. Like I can't stress that enough. Like he is very, very good with gun skill, and he has been since he came into the league in World War II. That's never been a question as whether or not Blast is skilled. The questions come: is it an online thing? Is it a LAN thing? Can he lead a team? Is he making the right play, or is he just going for kills? So, but for Blast, for me, like the situation is basically, I'll throw Decimate's name in there as well for those two guys. It's a situation where like they're both very skilled, but they need direction, and they clearly did not have it last year. I don't know if they weren't listening to Bevels because I don't think Bevels is a bad coach, and Ricky's also there as well. I don't know if they wasn't listening to them, but how do you only win like 3 Dom games an entire year with the talent that Blast and Decimate have? Like it's not really acceptable. It's not. But next year, back to 4v4. Where this guy is grinded and came up in. Back to 44 S&D for Blast. And I think if he does play in the scouting series, I think the perfect place for Blast. You put him in like 8s online. Like I know I hate saying online, but it's for Blast. It's like one of the exceptions where in 8s he did get consistently like 40 kills every time he played and took over maps and was like untouchable online in World War II. So if he can get back into that form in the scouting series, and people can take a look out and be like, hey, he's still got it. He's still got the skill. Like even though they did badly last year, he's still very skilled. I could see him being a sub player, like a substitute player for a team. And actually, Yas and I were talking about it, and we mentioned we should throw out Chicago's name because like he wouldn't ever play probably for Chicago, but he and Dash here are friendly with each other. Mm-hmm. And also, I feel like Blast is a really good personality. Like I feel like he'll be a good streamer, and he'll have good interactions with his chat, and he'd be a good guy to build a brand. He would not have been like 3 years ago, trust me, right? But now he's a little more matured and has a fun personality, so I like to see him in the league still. And then to round out the list, we got Kismet. Kismet is like, there's other players too we could have mentioned, but Kismet I wanted to mention because, again, he's one of those guys like Blast who's extremely skilled and kind of needs better direction. And the thing with Kismet is like it's super inconsistent, right? That's like the thing we always talked about for Kismet is it's never event to event. He's always performing. He has his bad events, and when he does, it's noticeable because he can't. Right? He plays the Slayer for his team, so he can't have you can't be going double negative and stuff like that. So if he can become more consistent and find a consistent team to run with, I think he could do great next year. I just don't know where his motivation is anymore. So I feel like a big problem for these guys that like Blast, like Decimate, who didn't perform like that well last year in the league and are now outside. I think Yas mentioned it with Slacked and Classic and those guys too. Finding the motivation to grind in the challenger scene is not going to be easy, especially because of how competitive the amateur scene is, right? But if you want a shot when the expansion comes next year, I think it's worth sticking around and fighting for your spot. Like Kismet and Blast stick around the challenger scene, show you can still like hang and you're worth the risk when the scene does expand, which it like hopefully does. But what do you make of that kind of thinking, Yas? With like just wrap the podcast up. What do you kind of think of like motivation in players in the AM scene?
Yeah, no, especially for these foreign pros, it's important for them to display that motivation. And you see it on Twitter, but it really only applies when you show it in game, show it every single day, not just say it on Twitter. I think uh, Doug says it a lot. And only did he really just demonstrate that when he started to play in the challenger scene. I felt like I like Doug, and I believe him when he wants to be a professional player in this league. But when he wasn't taking every opportunity available to him, like playing in the challenger scene, those words felt empty. So what I think we need to see with these former pros is them taking every opportunity to show that they're still as hungry, motivated as they were when they first got into the league. As for the other pros, again, with COD going to a franchise model, it makes it that more difficult for them to, get into the limelight, get into a secure and safe position. So it only heat up the competition, and we're seeing regions like EU, especially this year. EU looked a lot stronger than NA at points, and we'll get to that next week when we talk about the EU players. But again, these are all players that we talked about in general are to look out for. It would not surprise us to see a couple of these guys get an opportunity this season. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the scouting series.
Yes, that'll wrap up the podcast. Thanks guys for listening. If you managed to make it this far, like Yas mentioned, next week we're going to do the European scene, and I have some like pretty insane clips lined up for that. So definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, that'll be all from us. And yeah, scouting series should be fun. It should be a fun watch. So definitely tune in for that. And we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.